I'm Mel.
I'm Sarah.
And I'm Beck. And this is We Are Woman.
We talk a lot on this podcast about safety, about leadership, belonging, and expression, and the quiet exhaustion that comes from holding it all together. But beneath all of these conversations is something more fundamental: the state of the nervous system. Because how we lead, how we relate, how we show up in our lives is shaped not just by what we think or believe, but by what our bodies have learned over time. So today, in this episode, we want to slow things down and talk about the practice that quietly underpins so much of what we explore here: facilitated breath repatterning. It's not a technique to master, but it's a way of listening. Because the breath is always telling a story. It reflects our stress, our history, our adaptations. And when we learn how to listen safely, the body knows exactly what to do. Breathwork has become a broad word. For some people, it means intensity, others release, and for others, altered states or catharsis. So today we want to be clear about the kind of breathwork we're actually talking about here and that we are trained practitioners in. Facilitated breath repatterning is a safety-led, body-based practice that treats breath as information. We don't force change, we don't chase outcomes, we create the conditions for the nervous system to feel safe enough to respond. And in that space, sometimes through movement, sometimes through emotion, and sometimes through stillness, reorganization happens in its own time. This episode is an invitation to understand that difference and to sense what becomes possible when listening replaces effort. Sarah, I want to start with you. You were a huge part of bringing this work to Australia from Bali, which feels like a big leap in itself. How did you first come into contact with FBR, and what was it about the work that made you want to bring it home?
Yeah, thanks, Mel. Dan and I, so Dan is co-founder of now Breathwork Baron. Back then we were running already for a couple of years, about 6 or 7 years, we were running a variety of wellness retreats, spiritual inquiry, coaching, well-being for high functioning leaders and founders. And we were kind of looking for a modality that would bring more of an embodiment into our space. So we would do a lot of sort of more talking conversations and workshops on our retreats and in our practice. And we were looking for a way how to make that more interesting, but also how to bring some of the concepts and the cognition and the insights into a more embodied presence, both for ourselves and then also for the people that we work with. And so I think it was Dan who actually found Edward Dangerfield, the founder of FBR, on Instagram. And I think it was just word of mouth, or somehow Dan found his Instagram and then really resonated. And both of us really resonated with how Edward was talking about the breath and how it was such a profound pathway for healing and embodiment, and how he's really found after his avalanche experience, which has created PTSD for him. He shares it in another episode as well, but how he's really found the breath being such a beautiful pathway home and also into a deeper truth with himself. And so Dan and I just really resonated with the way he spoke about breath and wellness and actual embodiment. And then we went to Bali and we went to one of his containers, like retreat containers of practitioner training containers, and we did a 2 week it was sort of a 2 week immersion. And it was literally, we walked into the shala. It's a beautiful bamboo shala in Bali, just outside of Canggu. And it was just like even walking in there was something about the space. I was already like, wow, there's something interesting going on here. I couldn't necessarily put my finger on it. It was just kind of like a gut feeling. And then we all sat in a circle, and Edward started sharing about the breath and how it has helped him so in so many ways in his life. He explained some really basic things, and then we kind of immediately went into, like, within an hour or so, we were all the people, we were all breathing in circle. And I actually went through what I would call, what I now understand as a single event trauma in that one breathwork session. So I completed one cycle of breath in that first breathwork session there, and there was something about the way the space was held, about the facilitators, about the bodywork and the touch work, and about sitting in circle in that way that allowed my system to feel safe enough to actually go into that. I had already attended so many different breathwork practices and schools and so on. So breathwork in itself wasn't new for me, but there was something about this particular technique or the way it was held that actually allowed my body to soften enough for this particular incomplete reflex to come to the surface. And then, so that was my personal experience. And then we set up back in circle after breathing. We all got an opportunity to share. Every person that was breathing had an opportunity to share about their experience. And I just, not only my story, but also the story of everyone that was sitting there was just really reflective of the depth and safety and integrity of this work. And then I think, so I was like, wow, there's something going on here, right? There was something also about Edward that just really resonated with me. I could see a human being there that hadn't just gone through like an educational system and has his PhD in XYZ. I saw in him someone that has really walked this path through the fire and has embodied this in his own being. And that for me is very inspirational. Like, I really believe, particularly with this kind of work, I think education is important. I myself have a variety of education around it, which I think is very important, because we need to understand, I think, if we're going to help other people through trauma or difficult experiences or other experience, we need to have a broader understanding of what that actually means and how that impacts the body and the mind and so on. And then also, I think it's so important that we walk our own path in a true and embodied way. And that's what I really saw in Edward. So there was just something about the combination of all of those pieces, I guess, coming together that just inspired me so much. And then my personal experience in breath. And then Dan and I kind of looked at each other and we were like, this is pretty solid. And then Dan, actually, on the third day of us being there, had a conversation with Edward, because we were already running retreats and so on in Byron and in Australia. And Dan was saying, hey, how would you feel about, because Edward is doing research with his team around breathwork and the impact that it has on brain states and so on. And he was telling us about the research in the container. And so Dan was kind of suggesting to Edward, hey, how would you feel about us donating some of the money of the income of what we earn from the retreats towards the research, because we really believe in what you're doing here. And then Edward was just, without thinking, he was like, well, how about you just open Breathwork Barren? So there was a lot of, I guess, beauty and trust and just an immediate yes, I think, in all of our systems of this feels like a really healthy and good collaboration. And so it happened, right? So Dan and I finished that initial 2 weeks, and then we did another practitioner training, and then we brought the technique to Byron, and then we brought other people like the two of you into the practitioner training, and that's how it kind of all started.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. That's epic, and I can honestly say I am very grateful that you brought this technique over to Australia, and now it's given me the opportunity to share it as well. Beck, I know your story was a bit different, so yeah, let's explore that now. How did you come across FBR, and how was it different to what you'd experienced before?
Yeah, just quickly, I loved hearing in Sarah's story that really quick yes, and how aligned that felt for you. That's amazing. I hadn't heard it described that it happened so quickly before. Yeah, so for me, I was working In my work as a psychotherapist using various different modalities, I qualified as a psychedelic assisted therapist, and my experience of that space was that it was transformative in a way that I hadn't experienced before. And from there, I noticed that working with breath gave me similar experiences to working with psychedelics. And because of that, it opened up pathways for healing that weren't there, I suppose, in just general psychotherapy. So I loved the opportunity to work with breath and help open up those pathways for healing without having to use any particular substance to do that. But what I was finding with the breath work that I was coming into contact with was a lot of it, two things. So, in my experience of breath work that allowed me to experience that same space as psychedelic, it was always very effortful, a lot of efforting to get into the space where that healing could then take place. And with that effort, for me, what was coming online in my own system, which was an awareness for me in terms of how I work with others, is that when there was a lot of effort, along with that came a lot of fear. Oh my God, am I going to blow my system out? Am I going to pass out? Is this going to happen? Is that going to happen? So, what psychedelics offered that breathwork didn't was an easy path into that space. So there was that piece, and the other thing was there was just a lot of, I suppose, seeing breath work around that it all had to be really big, really cathartic experiences. And even now, if I open up Instagram, there's adverts for all of these massive experiences of breath work. So I knew that breathwork had the potential to meet me and meet my clients where I wanted it to. I just wasn't seeing something that felt easy. And then I met Dan, and he described this idea of FBR being different and effortless. And the skeptic in me was like, yeah, sure, whatever. And then I experienced it, and it was so effortless. I cannot describe how different the experience, given that we're still effectively doing the same thing. It's that conscious connected breathing, right? That is the same in many different modalities of breath work. Given that that is the same, the pathway into that space is so different. It's so effortless. So that was such an awareness, a wow for me. And then also I mentioned that if you look on Instagram, you can see there's people having these massive releases and it's all really big expression and everything. FBR feels very different because I wasn't up here in outer space. I was really connected to my body. And the saying goes, you've got to feel to heal, right? It allowed me to really feel deeply what was going on in my system, in all my different systems, but in particular my nervous system, and to stay with that. And then, sorry, I know this is getting long, but just to layer on to that, what FBR does different to anything I had experienced before is the level of attunement with the facilitator. I'd been studying a different type of breath work, and a facilitator, we're taught to walk around the room and maybe just touch the neck, or maybe just put a hand on the belly, or whatever that is. But literally, the facilitator is with you, either in circle, a huge amount of facilitators for the amount of breathers there. So there is someone there to support you at all times. But then in a one-to-one, the facilitator is literally with you, breath by breath, moment to moment. And it is almost always using touch work if that feels appropriate for you. If it doesn't, you do not have to experience touch work. There's ways in which you can say no to that as well. But that level of attunement, connection, and understanding, and the sort of dance between the facilitator, the breather, and the breath is just so different to anything I'd experienced before. So that was my pathway in, and it's a little bit addictive because once you see the transformative power of FBR as a modality, you can't go back to anything else. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much, Beck. And I think one of the key points, like there's so much that you just spoke to that I'd love to sort of, yeah, us all to go into. But I think one of the biggest things that you mentioned was it allowed you to feel into your system. And I know you mentioned you have to feel to heal. And that's not just cliche. I think that's so important to everything we talk about on our podcast here, because these things that we're exploring, they live in the nervous system, right? Safety, leadership, and expression and resting. Like we are learning what these feel like in the nervous system through yeah, going back down into the body, into these physiological states. And yeah, Sarah, you mentioned before that one of the things that you loved about FBR breathwork and why you and Dan brought it over to Australia was that embodiment piece. It was that, yeah, I had been in coaching with yourself for many years, and we were looking, into like mind-based things, but to be able to drop down into the body and embody what we're actually sort of trying to do, and what that actually feels like in the system. What does safety feel like? How much are we bracing throughout the day? What does connection feel like? Like it's really exploring these things at the level of the body. And that's what FBR does.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even the word embodiment is sometimes a bit overused in the sense of like, just because we're doing a breathwork practice doesn't mean we're actually embodied. Or just because we're doing a yoga practice doesn't mean we're actually coming from an embodied place. So I think what I really like, particularly when I just first came into contact with FBR, what I really started to see and realize was what embodiment actually really is and what it actually feels like. And it's really like, I'm not just feeling my feet, or I know that I have feet because I can see them, but it's because I can actually feel them, right?
Yeah.
Or and that goes throughout the whole body. That's sort of a principle. So yeah, and I found FBR also particularly unique because one of the things that Edward explained in those first 2 weeks that Dan and I joined his container was he kind of asked this question, which kind of went a little bit against other things I had learned about breathwork, which was, what is the right way to breathe? And we kind of all sat around and we kind of looking at each other. It was like, what is the right way to breathe? And I remember some people answering, well, it's about slow belly breathing, or it's about nose breathing, or this or that. And then Edward was like, yeah, is it about slow belly breathing when you're going for a run, for example? And we're like, maybe not,
Yeah.
Or is it about slow belly breathing when you're doing something else active? Or is it about nose breathing when you actually need more oxygen and you actually need your mouth, And so all of these things started to be questions. And really what I started to see is through this particular lens of breath work is, we call it like it's just really coming back to the basics around what is breath really and what is its basic function, and how can breath help us regulate our nervous system, and how it's already doing that all of the time. And I think that is particularly unique about FBR, is that it's not so much about changing your breath. It's actually about coming back to well, we do breathe with a conscious connected circular breath. And what that simply means is it's a non-habituated way of breathing, right? And in the non-habituated way of breathing, as we take away the pauses at the top and the bottom of the breath, the habits that are most present will start to emerge. And so that was a radical different way of looking at breathwork for me. It wasn't about slightly changing the breath or manipulating the breath. It was actually about coming back to the very basic, simple, natural way of breathing. And in that, what arises is the habits. And then the body work and the touch work is a way of working with those habits. And I understood in that moment when that was explained that this is a technique that reveals our unconscious patterns that are otherwise not able to be seen or felt. And I think that is like what I've seen in the world of breath work, that is quite a different way of looking at this work. And yeah, kind of back what you were already speaking into as well, because it's such a hand-on approach and because it's such high quality with lots of facilitators in the room and so on, it is really a healing modality. Like it is really a deep healing modality. And that for me was also, there was just a depth that I could find in this technique that I couldn't find in other techniques. I was like, oh yeah, this is really what breathwork is about, kind of thing. And I think the other techniques that I've done, no offense, like great work as well, but it didn't touch for me that level of depth. And that was for me about FBR really quite different. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because I still have a breathwork practice that I had from before FBR, which, in the morning I might do a certain sort of breath, which will help create a lot more energy in my system. And I feel fantastic afterwards. I feel like I can take on the world. But it is a momentary feeling, all of this energy flooding my system. It's not necessarily creating any corrective experiences, which I think FBR, we can go so much deeper with that, particularly when we're working with a therapeutic arc and we are, through titration, which I know you've spoken to beautifully before, Sarah, opening up gently that window of tolerance and exploring things we have not explored before or have not felt safe to explore before. It allows us to do that in a way that, yeah, I can see almost immediately other breath work modalities make me feel great instantly, but they don't allow me to go there.
Yeah, I love this, Beck. I think one of the biggest gifts of FBR is being able to go deeper and increase your window of tolerance and therefore, or meaning we can increase our capacity. We don't need to bypass states or emotions. We can stay with them. I think, that titration that you both speak to, our nervous system gradually learns that certain sensations and emotions, they don't need to be feared or controlled or escaped. And as safety increases, so too does our range. And I think it goes back to, we use this term dynamism, right? And it's that ability to fluidly go between states and sensations and emotions without a collapse or a shutdown, which is so important in everyday life and so important to what we speak about on this podcast, going back to our safety and our belonging and our power. And instead of living in sort of a narrow emotional bandwidth, we get to experience life like through the full spectrum. And I think, Sarah, I've heard you speak to this, like we get to experience the whole rainbow of colors, more color, more depth, more nuance. And because FBR allows us to increase our capacity to hold emotions and stay with them safely.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's such a beautiful summary, Mel, of what FBR really is and what it facilitates. Is it's a process of allowing us to hold more safety within a variety of emotional experiences.
Yeah.
And And in my experience, ultimately in life, like wherever we feel unsafe, not always, but for a lot of us, it actually has to do with not feeling safe in a particular emotion or expression within ourselves. And so, what this particular technique allows for is a reclamation of all of the different parts of ourselves, including, yeah, maybe rage or terror or, you know, parts of sexuality that might seem overwhelming or scary for some of us to embody. And in that, we can really find more safety and more capacity. And that then, of course, allows for more full life. Like we can actually experience the fullness of life with way more ease. I think that's an important nuance as well. We get to experience the fullness of life with a lot more ease. And we start to see that we can actually achieve the same amount of outcomes with very little or less effort even than before. And I think that's important in life. It builds confidence ultimately. I think as we embody more parts of ourselves, we start to feel more confident in the world, and more is possible, and more doors open up for us because we have explored these pathways within ourselves. And I'm a firm believer of, and it's not just a belief system, it's what I've seen in both myself and then the people I've worked with, is that the more we pathways we discover within ourselves and actually look within ourselves, the more our outer world also starts to reflect that back to us, and more pathways actually open up in our outer world as well. I think this work is sometimes underestimated in terms of what it can really do for people in their life and how important it is to attend to it.
Yeah, I feel like, just to share a personal experience, a really big thing I've learned through being able to hold capacity to a certain emotion, and I'll call it anger for now, but anger was something I feared in my system. So when I felt that, I would push it down. But FBR breathwork has allowed me to feel that and stay with it. And through that, I've learned, and look, we may be able to nuance this. I know in season 2, we'll go beautifully into all these types of things, these emotions like anger. But what I really learned was that there was anger, which was okay, because there was also power, and sometimes anger was needed to feel my power, or to voice boundaries, or to voice my needs. But the only way I learnt that was by being able to stay with the sensation in my body through FBR breathwork. And I share that because it's just an example of one of the gifts I've been given through FBR, and then how helpful that has been in my everyday life to be able to differentiate essentially between power and anger. And or maybe they're the same thing at times, or just that dance in between both, but be able to bring that into my life, which is that embodiment piece that we speak to, whereby we can embody these learnings and carry them through our life, and increase that spectrum that we spoke to, being able to feel the anger but not fear or shy away from it, and be able to go in and out of that. It's been a real gift for me.
Yeah, like when the anger arrives, not trying to push it down anymore, but inquiring as to why it's presenting. And I think something we've spoken to before is that everything makes sense through the lens of the nervous system, right? And I know the nervous system is a part of the whole. But one of the reasons why we keep returning to conversations about the nervous system on this podcast is because it really does give us a way to make sense of all of the stuff that might otherwise be confusing or frustrating. You described that anger, for example, maybe even scary. So things like, we might be asking questions around, why am I so tired all the time, even though I'm resting, or why can't I sleep in my case? Why does my stomach hurt? I see that from my husband constantly. Why does my stomach always hurt? Why is my digestion so slow? For you, Mel, why is my jaw always tight? Why are my shoulders high? Why am I breathing so shallow? And so the nervous system really does give us the lens in which to look through this. And then you layer on the practice of something like FBR, facilitated breath repatterning. And in that, we're not trying to fix any of that, which is so different, because typically you might come to someone like me to try and fix it. We're not trying to fix the symptoms. We're listening to what the system is communicating, and we're working with what's there to then allow things to be expressed, to move through, to step back, whatever that looks like. And in the allowing, that's when our symptoms soften back. And this is really different and unique. I think I've said this before. Many of my clients have said, oh, this is a really interesting way of working, but it gets results in a way that, yeah, we don't just look for the fix. We can understand why something is so, and that allows us to have agency for ourselves through that process.
I think a really beautiful part, and I feel like you were sort of speaking to this slightly, and I know, Sarah, you speak beautifully through this, so maybe you can take it from here. But I also love that FBR, and we are here to breathe, and we're here about the body, and we're here about the nervous system, and it is so important to everything we speak to on this podcast. But I know also, Sarah, you speak beautifully to the fact that it's also not about throwing the mind out. While we do go into FBR breathwork to allow the mind to take a step back, and there's reasons, for example, like it just allows the mind not to be in control, or some protectors to drop back. That's super important in our breath journeys. And it's not one or the other. And there is a sort of like a meeting between both the body and the mind. Both are just as important.
Yeah. Thank you for taking it there, Mel. Yeah, essentially, I mean, what we're doing with FBR, right, is that we are bringing content from the low brain, which is often referred to as the subconscious, the low brain into the midbrain. And what that means is that we get to experience, sort of re-experience a experience that was stored in the low brain, but now from a place of conscious awareness. So we get to actually watch ourselves going through a particular experience that was maybe previously overwhelming or too much, and therefore we couldn't fully process it. But because we're in a safe environment and because we're held in that way, it creates the safety is the thing that creates the container for the content to come from the low brain into the midbrain. Once we experience something in a safe container, it actually naturally, the stress cycle, the trauma cycle completes itself naturally. And why the mind, in my opinion, is a very important aspect of that as well is, well, first of all, because we have one. So we are humans and we both have a body and a mind. And so we need to learn how to work with both. I think we can't bypass any of it in that sense. It's all part of what it means to be human. And so, and secondly, it's important that we're able to interpret our experience in a way that is supportive for us. And so what I mean by that is the meaning making and the story we have about our experience. Like, are we just over and over re-experiencing anger again? Or are we also then starting to, okay, this is anger, but actually there's something useful in this and I can learn from this. And oh, actually it's me stepping more in my power. Well, that feels quite, empowering in that way. So I think what healthy narratives can do for us is a sense of empowerment and a sense of understanding our experience in a way that is actually going to bring more health to our overall system. I mean, obviously that's the overall intention. But the health comes also from how we interpret things in a lot of ways. And what I have seen is some people that go into more embodiment practices without necessarily also having some frames of understanding around how can we interpret some of this, they actually get quite overwhelmed. Not so much with FBR, but I'm talking more about like other embodiment practices now. They can actually get quite overwhelmed with an experience simply because they don't really have the reference point or the frames of mind to really understand or place it somewhere that makes sense for them, and that it could be also then a corrective experience. So this is where I do really see the importance of bringing the mind into the picture as well. If we just stay in the mind, however, we're of course missing a very important part, which is the embodiment aspect, right? So this is where I think both the mind and the body really work together, and we want to honor them both in a way that they really need to be honored in. And I mean, sit in meditation for an hour, and any human that is a little bit practiced can see that their mind is constantly narrativizing and creating stories. So if we're not aware of that, and if we're not learning how to work with our mind, the mind will have us. It will have us, right? Instead of us having it as a tool. And actually, another piece that I'll speak into here, which feels relevant as well, is like, what we're learning in FBR is we're learning to harmonize the mind and the body. And so what that means is we speak to this as the rider and the horse, or the rider and the elephant. If the elephant or the horse, let's just use the elephant for now. The elephant is the body. Yeah, the elephant is the body. The rider is the mind. We want to sync the elephant and the rider up in a way that they work together towards a common goal, if you will, or it's just harmonized, it's aligned. Yeah. If we just have a mind that is just overriding the elephant doesn't have freedom to explore itself, and it becomes very controlling often, or rigid kind of mindsets. Is because the elephant is too big, and a rider can never really manage that. And so what starts to happen is this chronic layer of stress underneath our nervous system, which we might not necessarily feel on a conscious level, but it's there because we're not honoring the elephant in the way that it needs to be honored. Now, if we just have an element and we just let it roam around free without some level of also guiding it towards the direction that we want to go, it's just chaos, right? Or it's just uncontrolled, which as a human being on this planet, for most of us, we really need some healthy direction, right? So yeah, what we're learning is to harmonize the elephant and the rider, and the mind and the body. And once there's harmony, there's actually a lot of ease and grace in the system available. If one of the two are kind of underdeveloped, so to speak, and they're not in harmony, that's where what I've seen, a lot of discomfort starts to happen.
It's actually interesting as you're describing that. I'm thinking about it from a personal perspective, something that FBR has really supported me to become aware of, I suppose, my own elephant, my own body. There's an awareness now of how much I was craving softness and flow and playfulness, and to use my body in that way. So, as an example, I have dance parties with my daughter most nights. She loves it. And we silly dance for about an hour together. And I was thinking last night while I was dancing, gosh, if anyone saw me, you'd think I was going a little bit crazy, to be quite honest. But what was really beautiful about that is FBR has really helped me find this freedom and flow, whereas previously I'd had this pattern of rigidity, and that was really a mind-led, I guess, the rider controlling the elephant a little bit more than was required, wouldn't allow the elephant the freedom of movement. And I see where that comes from, right? Patterns are not obstacles, and I think we learn this as part of FBR, that our patterns are not off obstacles. I see the rigidity, I've spoken about it before, has come from my need to be really vigilant for a lot of the time. So this rigidity was not an obstacle. It wasn't something I had to necessarily eliminate. In fact, it was really more evidence of the wisdom of my body and my mind, right? But FBR allowed me to find another way, which is just to allow that rider just to take a little step back and maybe watch the elephant and see what it does when it has a little bit more freedom. So I love this, what you're sharing here. We do need both because I can't just be silly dancing all day, every day. There's still a requirement for me to live in the real world and to make sense of things in the real world. There is still a requirement for all of us to be vigilant from time to time as well. So it is a beautiful balance, but FBR taught me that actually, yeah, it's actually taught me that it requires balance. It requires this allowing, which I wasn't prepared to give my elephant, my body, any of that allowing beforehand.
Yeah, I love that, Beck. It's kind of like what you say. It requires, I love what you said around sometimes it requires us to be vigilant in the world as well. And I think that is super important that we speak to that, because maybe in a lot of the healing kind of spaces or wellness kind of spaces, it's the focus tends to be more on, yeah, flow and allowing and these kind of things, which is true because most of us are just more on that end of the spectrum of either control or rigidity. But then also control and rigidity are super important parts of being human. Like we need to be able to healthily, control ourselves in certain environments and in certain contexts. And it's a really healthy and important thing. And maybe I'm almost thinking back to the episode around authenticity and belonging. And yeah, we want to be free in ourselves and we want to let the elephant, dance in a way that it wants to, if that occasionally, and then also, which could be referred to as our authentic expression can really come through. And then also we are part of a society and a human framework, and in that we also need rigidity, and we need to belong in that as well, and like we actually need to hold back parts of ourselves, and that's an important piece as well. So I guess this is also where I then see the mind playing a really important role, which is our discernment capacity, like our capacity to discern what part of us can come forward in this situation a little bit more, and what part of us can step back a little bit more, and actually the flexibility and the nuance to be able to discern it, but also then actually embody that, which is where the embodiment piece comes in, is what allows us to be really resilient. Like that's resilience, in my opinion. It's the healthily being able to assess the situation in the context that we're in, and then moving either forward or backward in different states or planes of ourselves, and working with the variety of just the variety within our inner experience to bring that forward in a way that's useful. So yeah.
And just really quickly on that as well, where FBR is really beautiful, I think we are constantly seeing in this sort of space of healing and growth that something needs to be big in order for it to be effective. And we live in this society where more is more, right? But sometimes it's in those really quiet experiences of a breathwork journey where some of the biggest experiences take place as well. So FBR really challenges this need for more to be more all the time in order to get there, as you described. I think it really just meets someone with what that person needs in that moment. It measures up to their system so beautifully to allow that awareness to take place.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to that idea that we trust this practice to meet you where you are on the day. And I love that you mentioned back that FBR breathwork sort of challenges that more is more because, we mentioned it before. Yeah, sometimes it may happen in movement, it may happen in sound, but something may also happen in silence and stillness. And I think it's really important to, yeah, that this technique does challenge that idea that it has to be big. And cathartic, as you said, and also accepting that it can just be soft and still, and that's where yeah, there can be some real work and some real healing as well.
I mentioned earlier, very specific to FBR as a style of breath work is the level of attunement with the facilitator, or the sort of role of the facilitator in that journey as well. And I wonder if either of you would like to maybe talk to how this is different, or yeah, just how the dance or the container that the facilitator helps support.
Yeah, thanks, Beck. Yeah, so from my point of view, the facilitator is so as well the facilitator as the breather have an essential role in the practice, because the breather is the one that is both leading and following the process of they're following the breath, but they're simultaneously breathing, right? So there is a leading and following aspect in that. And that is the exact same for the facilitator.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is the way we train FBR and the way we teach it is it's actually our listening capacity, which we can also then describe more as following. Yeah. So actually our receptivity and our capacity to listen to what's really going on in the body is going to have a direct influence on what choices in terms of facilitation we decide to apply in each moment, which is more of a kind of a leading quality, you could say, or more of an action orientated quality. And so the deeper we can listen to our breather, the deeper we can actually facilitate change. So in other words, the deeper we can follow the breather, the more deep we can actually also lead them. And I think also for the breather, that is in the same way, where the deeper the breather can actually start to follow their impulses and their breath rhythms and movement patterns and sound patterns that might start to come through, and the depth in which the breather can start to follow their own body is also the depth to which they can start to lead themselves in life more fully and deeply. And so I see, and then the dance, of course, between the facilitator and the breather is this direct mirror and reflection into how are we able to do that. Yeah. And if I as a facilitator come in actually with too much leading, I'm actually taking away a sort of a sovereignty or leadership capacity for my breather. However, if I'm coming in with too little leading and I'm just following, I'm also not creating enough difference or opportunity for them in some way. So I see the dance between the breather and the facilitator as a very important, nuanced dance that gets co-created in the moment, breath by breath. And I think that, again, is for me such a unique way of looking at FBR and at breathwork, that we really understand that. We really understand the I guess the creative aspects of this. It's a very creative modality in some ways. It's being created and co-created in the moment, breath by breath, moment by moment, pattern by pattern, you can say. And so the quality of the variety of breath patterns that the facilitator has embodied within themselves, including the quality of leading and following, is going to be directly reflected in how they can work with their people, their clients, so to speak, in a way that is actually useful.
I love that you mentioned that it is, yeah, the embodiment of our own breath patterns and how we've integrated those into our lives ourselves as facilitators. I think one of the biggest teachings upon becoming a facilitator was, we regularly engage in this practice ourselves so we can embody breath patterns, so we can meet ourselves in places of all the spectrum of the emotions that we've been talking about. So then we can equally hold someone in that. And then, yeah, that beautiful dance of what does holding actually mean? Well, sometimes it's leading, sometimes it's following, sometimes it's allowing the system to do what it wants. And that journey being the breather's journey. We aren't there to create an experience. That's not what we're there for. And I think it's beautiful before each circle we speak to. We aren't teachers, we aren't guides. We're here to work alongside you. And then, yeah, it just becomes that dance of following, leading, knowing when to actually step back, when to go in. I mean, we can talk about it another time. I love all the science behind the touches and why we do each thing as well, and why would we bring this facilitation in this certain moment, and then the choice points that come off that. But yeah, just reflecting back, I think the biggest thing for me, and reflecting back what you said, Sarah, as a facilitator is, yeah, just that dance between the leading and following and kind of flowing in and out of that.
Yeah, and I think this is why FBR is so beautiful in the way that it serves women, right? Because it can really support women with some of the patterns that are very typical, things like being completely capable and responsible and holding it all together. The pieces that you both, Sarah and Mel, have described in how facilitation works, sometimes for women, the facilitation allows them to be held in a really safe way in what might be the first time they've ever allowed themselves to be held. They've been doing all the holding for everyone, for their partners, for their kids, for the people that they work with, constantly gripping, holding, and that over responsibility. So the softness and allowing to be held, it's something that I think we've all got to witness, which can be so beautiful. And I know we've spoken about it before, but being able to be held sometimes, as I said, for the first time, it's not going into collapse. It's actually something really different. It's going into this place of trust and gently letting go and softening. And I often use the word surrender, but I mean surrender in this really beautiful, trusting way. And I think that's why facilitation is such an integral piece of this facilitated breath repatterning that, yeah, that is so unique and so special. And I think it really serves the women we work with in this really beautiful, special way.
Yeah, what I've seen, particularly with a lot of the both the men and the women, I guess, that I've worked with, but also a lot of the women, is just as a general breath pattern, the inhale being way bigger than the exhale. And yeah, what that reflects is like this holding quality, right? Back that you're speaking to, like kind of like holding that and inhale, 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 but not really exhaling, not really letting it go and just relaxing. And in that way, yeah, allowing ourselves to be held by, you can say, something greater than ourselves, or by life. And also, I think the reflection of um allowing ourselves to be held by life is also directly reflected by the kind of relationships we might choose, the kind of people we choose to hang around with, so to speak, including, yeah, our partners, our children, our friends, all of these things of like, does it actually feel reciprocal? And I loved, I think I shared this in another episode already, but one of the embodied science of breath courses that we did in Byron, we asked, what is breath? And it's kind of like a really basic question that we tend to ask in the beginning of the training to start us off. And one of the participants in the room said, breath is interdependence. And I really like that, because it's like, yeah, it is this interdependence between our inner landscape and our outer landscape. And the way we breathe is directly reflected with what kind of experience we are creating in our outer world. And that obviously includes the jobs that we choose, the way we look after our health and well-being, the partners we choose, how many children or no children, or where we choose to live. Like all of these aspects of our life, which are important choices, are being influenced by how we perceive ourselves and our lives. And what I love about this work is that I feel I'm contributing to people creating clarity in their own inner system. The more clarity we have within ourselves, the more we can discern what is actually good for us, what is actually appropriate for us, what is actually reflective of what we also, I think, deserve. And I speak a lot about with my clients, I work a lot on, shame, which is one of the emotions we're going to go into in season 2, which I'm very excited about. But also, yes, self-worth. And pretty much with everyone, what I see is that self-worth is such an important, way of looking at ourselves. Yeah, whether it's, you can say, more on the spectrum of high self-worth or not so high self-worth, is directly, again, reflected to the kind of choices we either make or don't make. And people can really suffer way less if they really understand their worth, in my opinion. The suffering that I think a lot of people go through, not everyone, of course, like a lot of things are also in some way out of our control, but the things that are within our control is a reflection of how do we see our own worth and our value. And yeah, I'm not sure why I went there, but it just kind of came through. But yeah, like, oh yeah, it was related to the interdependent relationship, and how the breath is really this beautiful mirror of whatever we have in our lives right now is a reflection of how we've seen and perceived ourselves over the last however many years. And breath can radically change that perception. And that is a really, can be quite a confronting thing, but also a really good thing. And we just up level, really. And also what I've seen with some of the people that I work with, if their environment is not meeting them in that a different quote unquote level, if you will, they're just outgrow the people and the environments that they're in. And that is a good thing, because I'm all for potential and creating liberation and potential. And I see that as a very positive thing, because it means they start to see themselves and their lives in a different way, and more doors open up for them, because they actually start to believe now that they're actually worthy of that.
Yeah, that's epic, Sarah. I think that pretty much, summarizes, like, I know you questioned where you were going with that, but I was tracking what you were saying, and it was just a beautiful exploration. Like, the breath is the mirror. And I love how you say that. And I think what's that thing we say where how you breathe is how you think is how you act is how you live. And that all starts with the breath. I think it's absolutely amazing. And what you speak to and reaching our potential through that, I think is epic.
I think I'm speaking to it. Might be why I brought it up, is because I really want to shine a light on what I've seen, like what I've really seen as evidence in both myself and other people, that this work can really create such profound changes in people's life. And I think a lot of us are including myself, for a very long time, conditioned in looking outside of us to, it's kind of like, I want this to change or that to change. And then we can't. My default also, like for many years, is like to kind of like look out my side of myself to change the situation or change the thing. And whilst that is important, because that is important, when we start to change our external kind of change, it just has to change with us. Otherwise we outgrow the environment, and then we'll change that, So it's kind of, I guess what I'm speaking to is just the beautiful sort of mysterious and yet also so obvious part of this work is like how the work works. And once the work really starts to work on us, it creates radical changes in our life. And I believe particularly FBR as a technique is a technique that I've seen works to actually change breath rhythms in such a way that it mirrors that reflection back in a really real and embodied way.
Also, I think it's important to share, as we're sort of starting to bring everything together, that FBR can be facilitated through a one-to-one directly with a facilitator, meeting you breath by breath, pattern by pattern, which is incredible. And equally beautiful, you can experience FBR in circle. And in circle, as I mentioned, it's not the case that there are 50 breathers to a facilitator. There are a maximum of 5 breathers to a facilitator, and that allows you to feel really held in the container of a circle as well. And circle can be a really interesting way to explore breath and breath patterns. I was listening to a talk by Peter Levine yesterday, and I'll butcher his quote, but he basically said, when we're part of a community, the community itself helps hold some of the difficult sensations, such as grief, that might arrive. So it allows us to move through that grief. And I've witnessed this in circle before, that there can sometimes be this collective holding of each other, even from breather to breather. So you've got breather to breather, and obviously a really good amount of well-trained facilitators supporting you in that experience. And for me, that is something really different to being in a room full of breathers, everyone having a really personal, really cathartic experience, which I've been in that experience as well, where you feel like you are there on your own in amongst all of this sort of sea of people having these really big experiences. I loved what Peter Levine described, and that's what I see in the circles that we hold in FBR as well.
Yeah, I love that, Beck. I see that too. And it's a beautiful thing to witness, really. Yeah.
At its heart, this podcast is about being a woman in the world, not in theory, but in the body. It's about safety and leadership, expression and belonging, softness and strength, and what it takes to live, lead, and relate without constantly holding ourselves together. Everything we explore here, from the nervous system work to creativity, relationships, cycles, and voice, comes back to the same place, the body. And breath is one of the most honest ways the body speaks, not as something to control or optimize, but as a reflection of how safe we feel, how much we're bracing, and how available we are for connection. Facilitated breath repatterning is one of the ways we practice listening to that language. It sits quietly behind all these conversations, supporting the nervous system to soften, reorganize, and respond in its own time. So even when we're not talking directly about FBR breathwork, the breath is always there, shaping how we show up, how we lead, and how we come home to ourselves. As you move back into your day, we invite you to notice one thing. Not how you're breathing correctly, but how much choice you have in your breath. Can it soften? Can it pause? Can it respond when something changes? That growing sense of choice is what integration looks like. This work isn't always about the session itself. It's about how the body carries safety forward into everyday life. And if this conversation stirred curiosity, reassurance, or even resistance, that too is information, just like the breath. If you feel drawn to explore this work in your own body, you'll find information on how to work with each of us in the show notes. So that's all from us today. Thank you so much for tuning in to We Are Woman. I hope today's conversation gave you something to reflect on, to feel into, or to carry with you into the rest of your week. Please make sure to click subscribe on your favourite podcast platform so you never miss the latest episodes as they drop. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a woman that would find it helpful, because this isn't just our podcast, it's all of ours, together. You can also follow us on Instagram at We Are Woman Podcast to stay connected, share your thoughts, and join our growing sisterhood. We've got some very special events planned and would love for you to be a part of them. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being exactly who you are.